Welcome to Sweet Dreams Storytelling, where we unwind, relax, and drift into dreamland. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm so glad you're joining me tonight. Let's get cozy and settle in. Story for this evening is our adaptation of a beautiful novel, Beauty and the Beast. Chapter 1. The Merchant Sips Fall. Once, in a prosperous city nestled beside a sapphire river, there lived a merchant of considerable means and even greater reputation. His name was Laurent Desmarais, and for many years his wealth and character were the envy of men who wore finer coats than their hearts deserved. Laurent was a widower, but his heart remained full, for he had 3 daughters, each more beautiful than the last, though none more cherished than his youngest. She was called Belle, not simply for her outward beauty, which was considerable, but for the grace she carried in her every word, the thoughtfulness behind each glance, and a softness in her voice that reminded all who heard it of lullabies from long ago. Where her sisters, Eveline and Colette, loved the shimmer of jewels and the laughter of society, Belle loved stories. She found treasure in pages and adventure in silence, content to pass hours by the fire with a book in her lap and her thoughts wandering through imagined lands. Their lives were woven with comfort. Silks draped their windows, marble graced their halls, horses pulled gleaming carriages, and yet for all the trappings of wealth, it was the merchant's love for his children that lit their home brightest. But fortune, like weather, changes without warning. It began with whispers in the port, a storm in the South Seas, ships missing, cargo lost. Days later, letters arrived, each more ominous than the last. His trading vessels, 4 of them, had vanished beneath the waves, sunk with goods bound for 3 different kingdoms. Debtors came knocking next, polite at first, then colder with each visit. Interest mounted, properties were seized. Servants, once loyal, disappeared in the night. Within 3 months, the merchant who once dined with noblemen found himself selling silver spoons to buy bread. Laurent bore it all with quiet dignity, but the strain hollowed his face and tightened his hands. Still, he sheltered his daughters from the worst of it. Fortune is a guest, he would say, smiling, and when it leaves, one must still keep the hearth warm for its return. But fortune did not return, not that winter. When the city house, the last of his holdings, was claimed by creditors, Laurent made a choice that would mark the rest of their lives. He took his daughters to the only thing left to him, a small cottage buried in the wooded hills, where once he had brought their mother in the earliest days of their marriage. The move was silent and swift. No farewells were made. The world of chandeliers and calling cards faded behind them like a dream. The cottage was smaller than Belle remembered from childhood visits. It leaned gently with age, and the vines that curled along the shutters seemed more possessive than decorative. The roof leaked in places, the well was stubborn, and the forest beyond crept close to the garden, as if uncertain of its welcome. Eveline and Colette reacted with horror. Eveline wept over her lost wardrobe. Colette claimed the air was too damp for her complexion. They bickered over chores, shrieked at mice, and found every excuse to revisit their former lives in conversation, tales of balls and admirers now heavy with bitterness. But Belle, ever steady, adapted. She rose before dawn to sweep ash from the hearth, learned to bake bread in a wood-fired oven, and found solace in the rhythms of rural life. She even sang as she worked, soft melodies that reminded her father of her mother. It was she who taught him how to plant herbs, who read to him in the evenings when exhaustion crept into his bones. In time, even the older sisters began to shift. Eveline grew fond of embroidery. Colette learned to milk the goat without complaint. Their hands grew rougher, their laughs rarer, but change, however slow, was happening. It was Belle who held them together, like a thread that mended fabric, invisible but essential. Still, no matter how hard she worked, or how sweet her smile, Laurent watched his youngest daughter and felt the weight of failure. She, who deserved the world, now walked barefoot through mud and stitched her own dresses by candlelight. He had once promised her everything, and now he could offer only the song of birds and the scent of pine. One evening, as snow began to whisper against the windows, Laurent found Belle staring into the fire. She held a book in her lap, though the pages hadn't turned in many minutes. "You miss it?" he asked quietly. "The life we left behind." Belle looked up and smiled, a real smile, warm and unburdened. "Not the life," she said, "but the people in it." He understood. Some friends had vanished as quickly as their wealth. Others had turned cold. The world, it seemed, loved them more for their coins than their company. Outside, the snow fell heavier, the wind sighed against the walls, and the fire cracked as if in answer. It was a hard life now, but it was theirs, and deep in Laurent's chest, beneath the ache of loss, flickered a strange peace. He still had his daughters, he still had their laughter, however rare, and in the flickering shadows of that small room, he saw something wealth could never buy, the strength of love that endured when all else fell away. He reached across and gently took Belle Sip's hand. "I may have lost the world," he whispered, "but I did not lose you." Chapter 2. Beaty Sept's New Life. The forest was still when Belle awoke the next morning, still except for the breath of wind curling through bare branches and the faint rustle of frost-kissed leaves. The sun had not yet risen, and in that quiet hour before light, the cottage felt like a world paused between dreams and waking. Belle sat up slowly in the narrow bed she shared with Colette. The mattress was stuffed with straw, and in winter, it crackled beneath movement like dry twigs. Her breath misted before her as she dressed quickly, tugging her worn shawl around her shoulders before stepping barefoot onto the cold wooden floor. Each morning began this way, not out of habit, but necessity. There was wood to be chopped, water to be hauled from the well that sulked behind the cottage. The goats needed feeding, and the bread dough must be started early if it was to rise before midday. In the city, these things had been done by hands they never saw. Here, Belle had learned the weight of labor and its quiet rewards. By the time the sun crested the treetops, a fire crackled in the hearth, the bread was proofing in a bowl by the stove, and Eveline and Colette were reluctantly stirring in their beds. Breakfast was simple: porridge sweetened with foraged berries, goat's milk, and occasionally a boiled egg. Belle always served her father first, pouring tea into the same chipped cup he used each morning. The ritual was small, but it was theirs. "I dreamed of apple pastries," Eveline muttered, staring gloomily at her bowl. "I dreamed of velvet gowns," Colette added, yawning. "I dreamed I had a moment's peace and quiet," Belle said dryly, then smiled into her spoon. Their father chuckled. It was a thin sound, worn from worry, but genuine. As the days passed into weeks, the rhythm of country life settled like snow, at first a shock, then a softening blanket. The sisters each found their ways of enduring it. Eveline, though quick to complain, began to take pride in her needlework. She fashioned curtains from discarded linen, embroidered pillowcases, and once even stitched a new dress for Belle using scraps of old gowns. Though she would never admit it aloud, the careful precision of the work calmed her restless mind. Colette, ever preoccupied with appearance, discovered in the forest a strange kind of vanity, a natural beauty she could not bottle or purchase. She gathered herbs for salves and pressed wildflowers between the pages of abandoned books. Slowly, her obsession with mirrors gave way to a fascination with healing balms and natural perfumes. But Belle thrived. She learned to recognize birds by their song, to read the weather in the wind, to find hidden paths through the underbrush. In solitude, she was never lonely. The forest, once dark and unfamiliar, became a companion. Her books, few though they were, she read over and over again, finding new meanings in old lines. When snow hemmed them in, she read aloud by firelight, giving voices to kings and paupers, dragons and heroes. She often read to her father, whose eyes had grown tired with age and grief. He would listen in silence, his hands clasped, his mind somewhere distant, perhaps in memory or in worry for the future. But Belle's voice anchored him, reminding him that not all had been lost. Still, shadows lingered. Despite their efforts, coin grew scarce. The little they made from selling goat cheese and embroidery at market barely covered the salt and flour they needed. Their clothes wore thin, the roof sagged further, and though Belle never complained, the cold crept into her bones more each night. One evening, as they sat around the fire, a gust of wind rattled the shutters, and the candlelight flickered. Laurent, lost in thought, finally spoke. "There is news," he said quietly. The sisters stilled. "One of my ships, the Isabelle, she has returned." Eveline gasped. "Returned, truly?" "She docked in Marais just 3 days past," he continued. "The cargo, textiles, spices, fine wares, it survived. It was delayed in a southern port, spared from the storms." Belle blinked, unsure whether to feel hope or suspicion. That means money, doesn't it? Colette asked, her voice high. It means I may reclaim what was lost, Lorraine said carefully. Not all, but enough. I ride for the city tomorrow to settle affairs. If the fates are kind, I may return with what we need. The sisters erupted into chatter, dreams of silk gowns, perfumes, rich foods, parties, restoration of their name. Belle alone was quiet. Her father turned to her. And you, Belle, what would you like me to bring you? She smiled. Truly, father, I need nothing. But surely, he said gently, you must want something. A gift for your patience, your goodness. She thought a moment, then bring me a rose, a fresh one. We haven't had flowers since we came here. Laurent laughed. A rose, not jewels, not dresses, a flower. A reminder, Belle said softly, of what we still have. The others scoffed, but Belle's father only nodded. He understood the weight beneath her simplicity. The next morning, he set off for the city. Belle stood at the edge of the forest as he disappeared into the trees, a small figure on a borrowed horse. She watched until the woods swallowed him whole. The wind whispered through the bare branches. She pulled her shawl tight and whispered a prayer to no god in particular, only a hope, fragile and fierce. Let him return safely. Chapter 3: The Storm and the Castle. The city of Marais lay many days' ride from the cottage, and Laurent des Marais travelled alone. He rode a borrowed horse, its coat shaggy with winter fur, and carried no baggage but a leather satchel, worn at the seams, containing a few documents of trade and the small hopes of his family. The journey began under a pale sun and skies, the colour of washed-out linen. As the forest gave way to rolling fields and icy streams, Laurent's thoughts turned over like restless birds. Every mile he travelled carried a thread of expectation, not just of money regained, but of dignity restored, and perhaps a bit of pride salvaged from the ashes of ruin. He was an old man by merchant standards, his hair greying, his back no longer straight, but it was not age that wore him down. It was memory, the knowledge of what he had once had and lost. It was Belle's request that stayed with him the most. A rose, something so simple, so impossible in winter. He had smiled when she asked it, but now, alone on the road, it haunted him. He reached the city on the fourth day, just as the clouds began to thicken like bruises across the sky. Marais was as bustling and loud as ever, wagons groaning under the weight of trade, urchins darting between horse hooves, vendors shouting their wares in the square. But Laurent saw it differently now. The gold-plated carriages and marble balconies seemed gaudy in the face of all he had endured. Still, he found his way to the port. The Isabelle was real, moored at Dock 17, its hull intact, its captain stunned to find his employer alive. The cargo, though delayed, had been sold, and the buyers had honored their contracts. Laurent was given his due, not a fortune, but enough to pay off the last of his debts, enough to repair the cottage, enough to breathe again. It should have felt like a triumph. Instead, as he left the city under a heavy grey sky, he felt only tired. The storm found him on the second day of his return journey. It began with a slow, persistent wind that clawed at his cloak and bit into his joints. Then came the snow, thick, wet, relentless, turning the road into a blur of white. The horse faltered, snorting and slipping. By evening, they were lost. The forest that had once seemed so familiar was now unrecognizable. Landmarks were buried under drifts, paths twisted like labyrinths. Night fell too quickly, swallowing the light and the road behind him. The cold was no longer discomfort, it was danger. And then, through the snow and trees, a flicker of light. At first he thought it a trick of frost-blurred eyes, but no, it shimmered again, steady this time, like a lantern behind a curtain. Desperation overrode caution, and Laurent nudged the horse forward. Branches clawed at his cloak, snow fell in thick curtains, but the light grew stronger. He came upon a gate, wrought iron, tall and strange, flanked by stone pillars carved with weathered symbols. Beyond it, a path curved through snow-laden hedges toward an immense structure half shrouded by fog and frost. A castle. Not a manor or chateau, but a towering edifice, its turrets piercing the storm sky, its windows glowing faintly with golden light. The gates creaked open at his approach, though he had not touched them. The horse hesitated. Laurent's heart thudded, but instinct, or perhaps sheer exhaustion, urged him on. He passed through. The snow ceased at once, as though the castle lay beneath an invisible dome, untouched by the storm outside. The path was clear, the air warm. He could even hear birdsong, impossibly, and the faint bubbling of a distant fountain. He dismounted slowly, unsure whether he had crossed into madness or magic. His boots crunched on gravel. No one emerged to greet him. The great doors of the castle opened with a whisper. Inside was warmth and beauty unlike any he had known. The walls shimmered with tapestries. The chandeliers glowed without candles. A fire roared in a hearth taller than a man. The floors gleamed, yet bore no footprints. "Hello?" he called. No answer. He wandered deeper. Each room was grander than the last. A dining hall with a feast already laid, steaming roasts, fresh bread, shining goblets of wine. A music room, where unseen fingers played a harpsichord. A conservatory, filled with flowers in impossible bloom. He was not afraid, not yet. He ate, he drank, he warmed himself by the fire. He removed his boots and rested in a velvet armchair as the storm howled outside the walls. He did not know who owned this place, nor why it was open to him, but in that moment, he was too weary to question generosity. That night, he slept in a bed of silks and feathered linens, more luxurious than any he'd known in years. At dawn, he prepared to leave. He found his boots cleaned and polished, his satchel packed with food and fresh coin, still no sign of his host. As he passed through the garden, heading for the stables, he saw them, roses. They bloomed in defiance of the season, heavy and red with dew that shimmered like diamonds, a miracle of color against the white snow. He stepped closer, drawn without thinking. He remembered Belsep's voice in the candlelight, "Bring me a rose." And so he did. He plucked one gently. The moment the stem snapped, the sky darkened. A wind howled through the trees. Thunder cracked above. Though no storm had been near, the air twisted, grew heavy, the scent of roses suddenly sharp, suffocating. Then, a voice. Low, deep, terrible. "You dare steal from me." Laurent turned, and the rose fell from his hand. There, rising from shadow and storm, was a creature taller than any man, shrouded in black, horned, eyes glowing like coals in a dying fire. A beast. It stepped forward. The earth trembled. Laurent dropped to his knees. "I didn't know, I thought, I only wanted—" "You took what was not yours." The beast's voice changed, curious now, almost coldly amused. "You will pay for this," it said, "but not with your life." Laurent's eyes widened in hope. "No," the beast growled. "You may go, but in your place, you will send me the daughter for whom you plucked the rose. She will live here, with me, forever." The old man collapsed, trembling. "Agree," the beast said, "or die now." The choice, if it could be called that, was made in silence. The gates opened once more, and as Laurent rode away, clutching the rose like a shard of guilt, the castle disappeared behind a curtain of mist, as though it had never been there at all. Chapter 4. The Beast Sept's Bargain. Laurent Desmarais did not remember most of the ride home. The road stretched endlessly, winding through frozen forests and across brittle, snow-covered plains. But the landscape was a blur behind a wall of dread. His hands were locked tight around the reins, the rose lying limp beside him in his satchel like a wound that would not close. The beast's voice echoed in his mind with each hoofbeat. "Send me your daughter, or die." He could still see the creature's burning eyes, hear the rustle of its heavy cloak across stone floors, feel the weight of a magic older and more terrible than anything the world dared name aloud. By the time the cottage came into view, smoke curling from its chimney, golden light flickering in the windows, Belle was the first to reach him. She rushed from the cottage as soon as she saw his silhouette between the trees, her shawl flapping in the wind, her arms wrapped around him before he could dismount. "You sit back," she whispered. "You sit safe." For a long moment, he could not speak. He pressed his face into her hair and breathed in the scent of ash and pine, like something real to anchor him. "I am," he said finally. "But—" He stopped. Behind her, Evelyn and Colette appeared in the doorway, blinking against the cold. Their expressions flickered with disbelief and relief. "Did you get the money?" Evelyn called. "Did they really pay you?" "Did you bring me the silk scarf I asked for?" Colette added. Laurent could not meet their eyes. "Yes," he murmured. "There is coin, enough for the winter, and more." They brightened instantly, already talking of trips to town, of repairs and replacements. Bill, however, was watching him closely. She saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his fingers trembled. "What happened?" she asked softly. That night, after supper, once his daughters were gathered by the fire and the wind began to rattle the shutters, Laurent told them everything. He told them of the castle hidden in the storm, of the feast laid out by invisible hands, of the voice that came from the shadows. He told them of the beast. He did not exaggerate. He did not need to. His words were heavy, low, as if the telling itself carved something from his soul. "And when I told him I had picked the rose for you, Belle," he said, eyes glistening, "he changed. He demanded you in payment. A life for a rose." Silence followed. Colette gasped. Evelyn muttered a curse. "But you refused, of course," Colette said quickly. "You told him no, that you said send him nothing." Laurent looked away. "You agreed," Evelyn hissed. "Father, how could you?" "I was dying," he snapped. "Not in anger, but in despair. I had no weapon, no hope of escape. The beast would have torn me apart had I refused. I thought, perhaps I would return and flee with you all, leave the country, anything, but his magic, it is not of this world. I could feel it watching me, even as I rode away." He bowed his head. "I made a coward's bargain, and now I must pay it." Belle, who had not spoken, stood slowly. Her face was pale but calm. "Then I will go." "No." Laurent Sepp's head snapped up. "Absolutely not." "I will go," she said again gently. "He asked for me, not for Evelyn or Colette, not for you, me. You don't know what he is. I know he let you go. I know he kept his word. That must mean something." Colette stood abruptly. "You can sit, be serious. You sit, just walk into a cursed castle with some monster." Belle turned to her. "Would you have preferred he kept father?" Colette faltered. Evelyn looked down, ashamed. Laurent rose, crossing the room to take Belle's hands. "I won't let you do this," he said, his voice breaking. "You sit, my daughter, my joy. You don't belong in some haunted palace with a creature who made himself judge and jailer over a flower." Belle's eyes shimmered, but she did not look away. "I belong where I sit needed," she said simply. And in that moment, there was something so steady in her voice, so unflinching, that Laurent knew the decision was already made. The next day, she packed lightly, a plain dress, a wool shawl, a worn book of poetry, and the rose now pressed between the pages. She kissed her sisters goodbye, Evelyn tearful, Colette ashamed, and hugged her father with all the strength she had. They left before dawn. The snow was lighter now, and the horse moved with more confidence. Belle said little during the journey. Her father tried once or twice to convince her to turn back, but she only smiled and shook her head. When they reached the gates of the forest where the castle had appeared, Laurent slowed to a stop. The air changed, warmer, stiller, a windless silence wrapped around them. "I don't know if I'll see you again," he said hoarsely. "You will," Belle said. "I believe it." He reached into his satchel and handed her a small mirror. "Take this. It belonged to your mother. It sits not much, but it sits something to remind you of home." Belle took it gently, brushing her fingers over the silver frame. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, before he could speak again, the gates creaked open on their own. The horse whinnied and backed away. Belle slipped down and stepped through. The gate closed silently behind her. Laurent called her name once. She turned, smiled, a brave, quiet smile, and was gone among the trees. Chapter 5: Beauty, Sex, Sacrifice. The forest closed behind her like a secret. Belle walked alone now, her feet crunching softly on the frost-laced path. The world here was too still, too watchful, as though every tree leaned forward to listen. Every shadow remembered her name before she spoke it. It was no longer the forest she knew. The sky above was grey, yet light slanted oddly through the trees, catching the frost like silver threads. No birds called, no animals stirred. The silence had weight, like a spell. And then, around a bend in the path, the castle appeared. It rose out of the forest like a story half forgotten and half feared, all towers and spires, balconies choked with thorned ivy, arched windows that glowed faintly from within. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if reality grew thin in its presence. Belle hesitated, but only for a moment. She stepped forward. The great iron gates swung open at her approach. With no creak, no resistance, no guard, they simply obeyed. She passed through them into the castle's inner grounds, a courtyard blanketed in frost that somehow did not kill the roses blooming defiantly along the walls. No footsteps echoed but hers. The front doors parted before her, revealing a grand hall bathed in golden light. Massive chandeliers hung above a black marble floor. The air was warm, perfumed faintly, with something floral and strange. Curtains shifted, though no wind stirred them. Still, no sign of the beast. Belle took a step inside, then another. Her hands were cold, her heart steady, not fearless, but clear. She had made her choice. Suddenly, a low voice filled the hall. "You have come." It came from nowhere, from everywhere, as though the castle itself had spoken. Belle turned slowly. There, at the top of the sweeping staircase, stood the beast. He was larger than she remembered from her father's description, not merely tall but towering. His form was cloaked in black, trimmed in gold thread that caught the light like fire. Horns curled from his head like a ram's, but his posture was not brutish. It was regal, and his eyes, dark and strange and far too human, watched her not with hunger but something colder, measured, waiting. She bowed her head slightly. "I am Belle," she said, "daughter of Laurent Desmarais." "I know who you are," the beast said. His voice was rough, but not cruel. Belle lifted her chin. "You said you would take me in my father Sip's place. I have come. If you intend to kill me—" "I do not intend to kill you." She blinked. "Then, what do you intend?" The beast descended the stairs slowly. Each step was heavy, his clawed hands hanging at his sides like shadows. When he stood before her, she had to tilt her head to meet his gaze. "I intend," he said, "to keep my promise. You will live here. You will not be harmed. You may eat, read, walk the grounds, ask for what you need, but you may not leave. Not without my permission." She frowned. "So I am your prisoner?" "No," he said, and his voice was softer. "You are my guest." "A guest," she repeated, bitterly, "with no right to leave." He did not flinch. "You may call it what you wish, but you are here of your own will. That matters." She said nothing for a long moment. "Then may I see where I will sleep?" The beast turned without another word and led her through a corridor lined with portraits, some torn, some faded, all unsettling. They passed through a solarium filled with plants that bloomed despite the season, a music room with a harp untouched by dust, a library whose doors remained closed. At last they reached a tall door carved with roses and vines. The beast pushed it open and stepped aside. The room inside took Belcep's breath away. It was vast but warm, with a fireplace already lit and windows overlooking the frost-covered forest. A canopy bed stood in the center, its frame carved of dark wood and veiled in soft blue silk. A vanity stood in the corner, a shelf of books beside a chaise lounge. Everything soft, beautiful, surreal. "I didn't expect this," she said quietly. "You are not a prisoner," the beast repeated. "Not unless you try to leave." She turned to face him again. "What do you want from me?" He did not answer immediately. Then, very softly, "Company." Belcep's brow furrowed. The beast bowed, not mockingly, but with strange, stiff formality, and left her alone. That evening, a meal was set in the dining hall. A lavish array of roast duck, candied pears, golden bread, and silver goblets of dark wine. But there was no host. Instead, a voice echoed through the space. "I do not dine with guests." Belle looked around at the empty chairs. "Then you will eat alone forever," she said calmly, and began to eat. The food was perfect, frighteningly perfect, as if imagined into existence rather than cooked. Each bite warmed her, filled her, but left a question on her tongue. How much of this world was real? After the meal, she wandered the halls, candles lit as she passed. Curtains shifted. Somewhere, unseen, music played, a waltz that made her heart ache without knowing why. Eventually, she returned to her room. On the bed lay a note, written in calligraphy. "You are free to explore the castle. The west wing is forbidden." And beneath it, a single rose. Fresh, fragrant, crimson as blood. Belle touched it gently. And though she had not wept all day, not when she left her father, not when the beast appeared, not even when the gates closed behind her, she finally let the tears fall. Soft, silent, like petals falling to the floor. Chapter 6. The Beast 6 Castle. Belle woke to sunlight filtered through pale blue curtains, gentle and golden, as if the dawn itself dared not disturb her. For a moment she forgot where she was. The warmth of the bed, the hush of the room, the faint scent of roses in the air. It felt like the memory of a dream. Then she sat up, and the truth returned. The castle, the beast, the bargain. She rose and dressed slowly in the garments that had been laid out for her, a gown of soft wool, sky blue and unadorned, its simple elegance unlike anything she'd owned. It fit perfectly, as though sewn for her alone. The castle greeted her in silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the watchful kind, the way trees hold their breath when a deer passes, or how a theater waits just before the curtain rises. As she stepped into the hall, the torches lining the walls flared to life without touch or sound. The air was warm, though no smoke rose from visible hearths. Belle walked slowly, absorbing every detail. The architecture was grand and old, but not cold. Every arch, every column, every curve of the carved ceiling bore an artistry that spoke of care and a mind that once loved beauty. She passed a gallery of mirrors, their frames gilded and intricate, though many of the reflections shimmered strangely, as if they showed not her image but memories. One held the image of a snow-covered forest path, and another showed her childhood bedroom for the span of a blink before dissolving into shadow. At the end of a corridor, she found a sitting room filled with soft chairs and a spinning globe of stars that hovered in the air, slowly rotating in silence. The stars flickered with impossible constellations. Some of the patterns pulsed faintly, as though remembering names that had been forgotten. She reached out to touch it, and the globe vanished. Later in the solarium, she walked barefoot among impossible blooms, jasmine, violets and orchids, all alive and blooming despite the frost that clung to the windows. A willow tree with silver leaves grew in the corner, its branches occasionally stirring as though breathing in some slow rhythm of magic. Birdsong played overhead, though no birds were visible. Magic, she whispered aloud for the first time. The word hung in the air like a breath. I doom inside a living spell. She was not frightened by it. Not exactly, but it made her feel small. Unseen hands left a tray of breakfast for her on a small table beside the window. Warm honeyed tea, poached pears, and a slice of spiced bread. A linen napkin embroidered with her name in thread the color of dawn. She ate in silence, not because she was afraid, but because she was listening. And the castle listened back. Midday brought her to the library. She had not expected to find it, not yet, but as she opened a carved wooden door, the scent of old paper and leather drifted out like a memory of her happiest days. The room was vast, not simply large, but endless, or nearly. Spiral staircases wound between shelves that rose to a ceiling painted like a sky in early spring, all soft clouds and birds mid-flight. Rolling ladders glided of their own volition, and entire sections were organized by theme, language, or perhaps mood. She stood in the center of the room and turned in a slow circle. Thousands of books, more perhaps, ancient tomes bound in gold-leafed parchment, slim poetry volumes, atlases of lands she had never heard named, fiction, history, philosophy, tales written in scripts she did not know but longed to read. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. For all the strangeness, for all the quiet dread coiled at the edge of her awareness, this library felt like home. A single book lay open on the table before her, as if placed there deliberately. She stepped closer and saw her own name written across the title page. Not Belle, but Isabelle Desmarais, her full name, in elegant ink-black script. She turned the page. It was blank. Then, slowly, letters appeared on the parchment. What would you like to read today? She gasped and took a step back. The ink faded. More appeared. Do not be afraid. This library is yours. She hesitated, then stepped forward again, wonder beginning to overtake fear. She touched the page. I stepped like a story, she whispered. One I stepped never heard before, something true and something beautiful. The book warmed beneath her hand. Pages flipped themselves. and the story began. That night, as the sun sank and twilight touched the windows with silver, she dined again in the grand hall. The table was set with crystal and candlelight. Music drifted from the far corners of the room, a string quartet, though no players were seen. The beast entered as she sat. She rose, startled, unsure what to do. "You do not have to stand for me," he said, voice quieter than the day before. Belle slowly sat. The beast remained at the far end of the table, never touching the food. "You don't eat?" she asked. "Not with you," he said. She studied him. "Why?" The pause that followed was long. "Because I do not want to frighten you," he said at last. Belle didn't reply right away. She looked down at her plate, her fingers toying with the edge of her napkin. "You speak gently," she said, "but you still hold me here. How can I feel safe?" The beast looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were unreadable, glowing faintly in the candlelight. "I am trying," he said, "but I do not know how." She didn't answer, but that night, in her room, she found something new waiting for her. A music box, carved with roses and thorns, sitting on her bedside table. When she opened it, it played the same waltz she had heard echoing through the halls. On the inside of the lid, etched in delicate script, were the words, "You are not alone." Belle touched the carved rose on the lid and listened to the melody until she fell asleep. Chapter 7. The Beast Appears. 3 days passed in the castle without the beast showing himself again. Belle explored its endless halls and secret gardens, each discovery deepening her wonder and confusion. There was a room of clocks that ticked in perfect silence, a hallway filled with paintings that moved, subtly, faintly, when she wasn't looking directly at them. A bathing chamber with a marble pool warmed by unseen fires, where steam curled like whispers above the water. She was never stopped, never followed, yet never alone. The castle responded to her as though it breathed with her. Doors opened at her thought. Books appeared on tables that matched her moods. The gowns in her wardrobe, once plain, now changed each morning, simple yet lovely, tailored to her figure, as though someone had guessed not what she wanted to wear, but how she wished to feel. It was comfort, but not peace. She did not forget. Every soft bed, every golden fork, every rose in bloom whispered a question: "Why am I here? And why did the beast hide?" On the fourth night, she found herself once again in the dining hall. As always, the table was prepared, glimmering, abundant, yet untouched. Belle sat in silence, the flickering candles casting twin shadows on either side of her. She was halfway through her meal when the voice came again. "May I join you?" She turned sharply. The beast stood in the archway. This time, he did not remain distant. Slowly, he stepped forward. His hoofed feet made no sound on the polished floor, his cloak trailing behind him like smoke. The candlelight caught the fine gold embroidery along his collar, the line of his horns curving like obsidian branches. His face was a mixture of beast and man, a mouth with lips that could speak, eyes that almost mourned, and a jaw too broad, too furred to be human. He approached the table and stood at the opposite end, not sitting, merely watching her. Belle met his eyes. It took effort not to flinch, not to drop her gaze, but she didn't. His eyes weren't monstrous. They were strange, yes, and deep, not empty, not cruel, just lonely. "Of course," she said softly, "it sets your home." The beast sat, slowly. His chair groaned beneath his weight. Servants did not appear. Dishes did not move. Yet food was already placed before him, rich and steaming, meat and roasted roots and bread still warm. He did not touch it. "You haven't eaten with me before," Belle said, watching him. "No. Why now?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I thought you might be ready," he said. She blinked. "Ready for what?" "To see me." She tilted her head. "I already have." He gave a low sound, not quite a laugh. "You said looked, but you haven't seen." Belle set her fork down. "Then help me, tell me what I Sidham meant to see." He leaned back. "Tell me instead, what do you see?" She looked at him, truly, deliberately. The curved horns, the furred jaw, the massive hands, clawed and motionless on the table, but also the stillness in his posture, the careful restraint in his voice. "I see someone," she said slowly, "who is trying very hard not to be feared." The beast was silent. A long pause stretched between them. measured in heartbeats. "You are braver than most," he said at last. Belle Sep's voice was quiet. "No, just unwilling to judge by shadows." He inclined his head. They sat in silence after that, eating at opposite ends of the table. The air between them was not comfortable, not yet, but it was no longer hostile. She could feel something shifting, a current beneath the surface. As they finished the meal, the beast stood. "Before you go," he said, and this time his voice trembled ever so slightly, "I must ask you something." Belle looked up. "Will you marry me?" The question landed like thunder in a still room. Belle stared at him, shocked. "You what?" "I ask you every night," the beast said, "or I will, until the answer changes." She stood slowly, her fingers trembled at her side. "I don't even know you," she said, voice caught between disbelief and sadness. "I understand. Why would you ask that now?" His voice was almost a whisper. "Because I must." Belle hesitated. She saw the pain in his eyes. Not fury, not desperation, but the sadness of someone who already knew the answer. "No," she said gently. The beast closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for your honesty." He bowed slightly and turned to leave, his steps heavier than before. Belle watched him go, heart pounding, not out of fear, but from the strange weight of the moment. He had asked not like a monster claiming a prize, but like a man asking for mercy. She sat back down, staring at the flickering candles. Whatever spell lay over this place, it was not the only one binding him. That night she could not sleep. She wandered the halls instead, barefoot and silent, trailing her fingers along the stone and silk, listening for music that did not play. When she passed the library, the door opened for her. A book lay waiting on the reading table. She hadn't requested one. She hadn't spoken aloud. It was open to a page halfway through. A single line glowed in golden ink. "A rose does not fear the thorn. It simply chooses to bloom in spite of it." Belle touched the words gently, then closed the book. In the silence, she whispered aloud to the darkness, "I don't think you sir a monster." And far away, perhaps in his own chambers, or in some secret room the castle kept hidden, the beast, who heard more than he ever let on, closed his eyes and let himself believe it, even if only for one night. Chapter 8. A strange routine. The days that followed did not unfold like prison sentences. They unfolded like pages. Each morning, Belle awoke to find something new waiting for her. A ribbon in her favorite color resting atop her vanity, a novel in her native tongue placed gently at her bedside, a breakfast tray with fresh blackberries and warm cream, even though it was the dead of winter. The castle, it seemed, was always listening. So was he. The beast no longer hid. He did not follow her, never invaded her solitude, but he appeared each evening unfailingly at supper. He never demanded, never loomed, and his voice, once like gravel and thunder, grew softer in her ears. Not quite human, but no longer frightening. She had not yet grown comfortable in his presence, but she had grown curious. It began, as most things do, with small questions. "Have you lived here long?" she asked one evening over candied chestnuts and roasted pheasant. "A long time," he replied. "Alone?" He hesitated. "Not always." And that was all he said. The next night, she asked, "Do you sleep?" "Yes." "Where?" His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. "In a room you may never ask to see." That made her laugh. He watched her as though the sound startled him. She began to track her days, not by hours, but by habits. Morning walks in the frost-wreathed gardens where roses bloomed in impossible color. Midday reading in the library, where books sometimes whispered their titles when she touched their spines. Afternoons in the music room, where she found an old piano. When she first sat to play, the keys were out of tune. The next day, they were not. Once, she entered a chamber filled with paintings, landscapes that changed subtly with the seasons, portraits that aged or smiled when she stood near. She found one canvas always shrouded in shadow, its figure too obscured to see. She asked the beast about it at dinner. His answer was quiet. "Some things the castle protects even from me." She thought about that for a long time. He asked questions too. "What was your favorite book as a child? Do you prefer snow or sun? Why did you ask your father for a rose of all things?" She answered him, always honestly. "A rose," she said one night. Because they remind me that beauty survives winter, that something tender can still grow in cold places. He looked at her for a long time after that. The beast no longer dined at the far end of the table. He now sat across from her, not close, but no longer distant. His movements were always careful, measured, as though he were afraid to break something delicate between them. Sometimes she caught him watching her, not with hunger or possessiveness, but with something quieter, a kind of yearning that frightened her more than fangs might have. She never asked him again what he was. She did not need to, and every night, as if bound by a spell of his own making, he asked her, "Will you marry me?" And each night she answered, "No." Not with cruelty, never with mockery, but with kindness and clarity. And every time he bowed his great head and said the same thing, "Thank you for your honesty." But something was changing. She noticed it not in his face, still beastly and hard to read, but in his silences. He no longer growled beneath his breath or bristled when denied. Instead, he looked hurt. Not wounded like an animal, hurt like a man. One evening after she refused him for the 5th time, he lingered at the doorway as she rose from the table. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. Belle stopped, turned slowly. "No," she said, surprised. "I don't set. Are you afraid of me?" She thought, not anymore. He looked down at his clawed hands. "Then why," he asked, voice low, "do you look at me like I sip something sad?" Belle didn't sit answer. Because the truth was, she did feel sad when she looked at him. Not because of what he was, but because she sensed he no longer remembered how to hope. Because each night he asked her the same question, and each night she gave the answer that should have protected him. Yet he always seemed a little more broken. And though she did not love him, not yet, she had begun to care. That night she dreamt. She stood in a rose garden at dusk. The petals glowed faintly, pulsing like heartbeats, and from the mist a man emerged. She could not see his face, but his voice was familiar, low, sorrowful, warm. "Don't forget me," he said. "Please, you must look closer." "Who are you?" she whispered. "I stumped the one behind the mask. I stumped the one waiting to be seen." Then he vanished, leaving behind a single falling petal which turned to ash before it hit the ground. Belle woke with tears on her cheeks and a question on her lips. Chapter 9: Beauty Scepter's Dreams. Belle awoke before dawn, heart racing, the dream clinging to her like dew on a spider's web, delicate but impossible to shake. She sat up in bed, clutching the soft blanket to her chest. The memory of the man's voice, low and mournful, echoed in her ears, though she had not seen his face. The ache in his voice, that fragile pleading, had been unmistakable. "You must look closer." The words returned like a whisper between her ribs. She crossed the room and opened the tall windows. The sky was still dark, the stars fading into a misty horizon. Below, the castle's gardens lay quiet under a layer of frost, silvered and still. The roses, undaunted by winter, shimmered softly. Belle watched them and remembered in the dream. Each flower had glowed, their petals pulsing like living hearts. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't set, just a dream. That day the castle seemed quieter, as if it too was thinking. The books in the library had stopped whispering. The piano, when she touched the keys, made no sound. Even the portraits seemed more still than usual, their gazes vacant, their painted hands folded stiffly. Something had shifted. In the corridor just outside her room, she passed a mirror she had ignored before. It was tall, gold-framed, with a thin crack down one side like a scar. As she looked into it now, she didn't see herself, not entirely. The image stared back at her with her same eyes, same figure, same hair, but there was something else, a shimmer beneath the surface, a faint, flickering overlay of someone else's sorrow, as if the mirror held a second reflection behind the first. She reached out and touched the glass. It was warm. That night, dinner passed in silence. The beast was subdued, his posture heavy, his gaze distant. He barely touched his food. Belle watched him carefully. She had learned to read the small things, the twitch of a claw, the dip in his voice, the way he sometimes stared at the table as if afraid of what he might say. When the meal ended, he rose without asking the question. For the first time, he simply bowed his head. "Good night, Belle." She stood. "Wait." He paused in the doorway. "I had a dream," she said. "There was a man. I couldn't see his face. But he asked me not to forget him. He asked me to look closer." The beast did not turn. He said nothing, but she saw his shoulders tense. "Do you know what it means?" she asked. His voice came low, thick. "It means," he said, "that the castle is starting to trust you." He left her in silence. The next dream came more vividly. She was walking through the halls of the castle, but they were different, brighter, unbroken. The tapestries were whole. The marble gleamed, fresh and unstained. Laughter echoed down the corridors, familiar voices, warm and alive. And then she saw him again. The same man from before, dressed simply with a dark coat and a sorrowful look in his eyes. This time, she could almost make out the edges of his face, not quite a stranger, not quite known. "Who are you?" she asked again. But this time, he did not speak. He reached for her hand. When she touched his fingers, her skin burned with warmth. Her chest filled with something like grief, not hers but someone else's. The man began to fade. She cried out, "Don, sit, go." And he whispered one final thing. "Please don't. Sit, let me disappear." The next morning, Belle paced her room, then the hallways, restless, everything she'd seen, the man, the dreams, the castle growing clearer, was pressing down on her like a rising tide. She found the beast in the garden, seated beneath the withered willow tree, the snow falling silently around him. His cloak trailed behind him like a shadow, his breath rising visibly in the cold. "You knew," she said, not bothering to greet him. "You knew about the dreams. You knew they weren't just fantasy." He didn't look at her. "Yes." Belle stepped closer. "They sipped memories, aren't they? Yours." Silence. "You were human once." The beast looked up. His eyes, dark, gleaming, were full of sorrow. "I still am," he said, "in the parts that matter, but the rest of me was taken, shaped into something else." Belle sank to the stone bench across from him. "Then the man I see is who I was," he said, "or perhaps only who I might have been." She studied him, her breath clouding in the air. "Why show me?" she asked quietly. "Because," he said, his voice breaking, "the magic here is ancient and cruel. It holds on to pain. It refuses to die unless someone sees the truth, really sees it. And the curse." He turned his gaze toward the roses blooming despite the snow. "It doesn't break by love alone," he said. "It breaks by understanding, and that is rarer." Belle said nothing, but for the first time, when she looked at him, she did not see a creature cloaked in darkness. She saw the shadow of the man from her dreams, and for the first time, she didn't wonder what he was. She wondered who. Chapter 10, The Library and the Garden. The morning after the truth began to unravel, Belle woke before the first light broke across the sky. She had not dreamed, not of the man in the rose garden, not of fading faces or glowing petals, only silence. A strange kind of silence, not empty waiting. She dressed quickly, tugging on a cloak the color of twilight, and walked barefoot through the sleeping halls, her fingers grazing the stone walls for guidance. The castle was still, hushed as a breath held before a confession. She made her way to the library. The doors were already open when she arrived, as if the castle had anticipated her. A soft golden light filtered in through the stained glass windows, casting shifting colors across the marble floor. The room was warmer than usual, cozier. Someone had lit the fire. In the quiet, Belle wandered between the shelves. Her hands touched bindings gently, reverently. She didn't reach for the magical book that wrote back. Not yet. Today, she wanted to read stories written by other people, other dreamers. She pulled down a worn volume of poetry and curled into the window alcove with a blanket left there just for her. She read slowly, the words falling into her like drops of water, gentle, shaping. "There is a heart beneath the thorn, a soul inside the clay. What thecks fierce may still be born again, if seen the proper way." She paused. Read it again. The castle, she thought, was full of things like that. Hidden hearts, buried truths. She had been walking among them for weeks, but now, at last, she had begun to see. Not everything, not yet, but enough to want to understand more. Later that day, the beast came to her. Not at supper, not in a hallway, but in the library itself. She heard his footsteps first, soft, heavy, careful. She looked up from her book and saw him in the doorway, framed by golden light, his cloak dusted with snow. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded. He walked to the fire, then sat in a large armchair across from her. The silence between them wasn't strained, just unfamiliar, like two musicians finding a rhythm before a song begins. After a long moment, he said, "This was my favorite room, when I was before." Belle closed her book slowly. "What did you read?" "Anything," he said. "Everything. I thought if I read enough, learned enough, I could become more than I was." He looked into the fire. "I was clever, arrogant. I wanted the world to see me as great. I never thought to ask if I was good." Belle watched the flicker of firelight against his features. "You still read," she said softly. He glanced at her, not for the same reasons. They sat together, the quiet deepening. Then she asked, "Would you show me your garden?" He blinked. The west garden, the one with the roses. Something shifted in his posture, not fear, but hesitation. That part of the castle had been off limits, not by decree, but by grief. It was where she had never wandered. Until now, he stood slowly. "Come." They walked in silence through the west wing. The air changed as they moved. The halls grew quieter, the light dimmer. Here the castle seemed older, more worn, the magic thinner, or perhaps more reverent. And then the doors opened. Vel stepped into the garden and gasped. It was a wide, walled space enclosed by arches of ivy and tall hedges. Roses grew everywhere, climbing the walls, winding around statues, blooming in thick clusters along the stone paths. Red, white, golden, violet, each flower radiant, untouched by frost. At the center stood a fountain, frozen mid-spray, with a statue of a young man she did not recognize, carved in marble, head bowed, one hand pressed to his heart. "Estes, beautiful," she whispered. The beast said nothing. She turned. He was standing at the edge of the garden, unmoving, as if afraid to come closer. She walked toward him slowly. "This is where I saw him in my dream," she said. "The man, he stood right there, among the roses." The beast's voice was low. "Then this place remembers more than I thought." Belle looked around. "Who planted them all?" He looked up, not at the garden, but at her. "You did." She blinked. "What?" He took a step forward, hesitating. "The rose my curse was bound to, it withered years ago, but the garden didn't die. It bloomed again, the night you arrived." She didn't know what to say. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," he said. "Just know that the castle answers to you now. It listens to you, and the more you see, the more it becomes what it was meant to be." Belle turned in place, slowly. The roses swayed in a wind that did not touch her. They shimmered with dew even in midwinter. Every color glowed like a secret revealed. "What is this place?" she asked. The beast was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It sets the last part of me that remembers hope." Belle stepped closer to the statue at the center. She stared at the carved features of the young man, noble, sorrowful, familiar in ways she couldn't name. She looked back at the beast. "I think I'm starting to remember it too." Chapter 11. Shared Secrets. Winter deepened, and the days grew shorter, but inside the castle time felt fluid, as though each moment unfolded with more weight than the hours that passed outside. The snow beyond the enchanted grounds grew heavier, and yet within the castle's boundaries, the gardens still bloomed, the fires still burned, and Belle found herself forgetting what season she had come from. Her days had shape now. She would read in the mornings, often with a cup of honeyed tea, left precisely the way she liked it. She would walk in the garden in the afternoons, letting her fingers brush the living roses, always blooming, always fragrant. In the evenings, the beast would join her for supper, and they would speak, not just of the castle or her dreams, but of ideas, books, history, regret, desire. And slowly, Belle realized something impossible was happening. She was beginning to trust him. Not because she had to, but because he had earned it. It began with a question. "What happened to you?" she asked one night, gently. They were seated not at opposite ends of the long dining table, but at one side, beside the fire. He no longer loomed. He no longer hid behind ceremony. He simply was. The beast looked into the flames for a long time before he answered. I was cursed, he said, but not by a sorcerer seeking revenge, not exactly. Belle said nothing, letting the silence hold space for the truth. He continued, there was a woman once, a traveler, a healer. She came to court, seeking shelter one winter sip's night. I turned her away, not rudely, not with cruelty, but with indifference. I judged her by her clothes, her face, her accent. I didn't see her as real. He clenched his hands together. The claws didn't frighten Belle anymore. She wasn't a beggar, she was a witch. She cursed me, not out of malice, but to teach me, to strip away everything I sit hidden behind. My name, my face, my power. I would remain like this until someone could look upon me and truly see me, and love me in spite of what they saw. He turned to Belle. But love, she said, was not enough. Understanding had to come first. That is the part no one remembers in the old stories. Belle sits, brow furrowed. Has anyone else tried? His silence was answer enough. A Seb waited, he said. Years, decades perhaps. Time doesn't move here as it does outside. A few have wandered in, most fled. Some tried to kill me. His voice was flat, not bitter, just resigned. And the ones who stayed, she asked. He looked at her, and something deep in his gaze flickered. None stayed long enough to ask what you just did. Belle looked down at her hands, then back at him. You don't deserve to be alone, she said softly. He looked away. Perhaps not, he said. But the curse isn't sick about what I deserve, it's sick about who I become. Later that night, Belle stood before her mirror, the one her father had given her, and traced the silver frame with careful fingers. She hadn't looked into it since the day she arrived. It had felt like a relic of a world she no longer inhabited. But tonight, something pulled her toward it. She whispered, "Show me them." The glass rippled. And then her sisters appeared, Colette, wrapped in a fine shawl, speaking animatedly to a young man Belle didn't recognize. Eveline sat at a writing desk, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her father, older now, more tired, was seated by the hearth with a cup of tea, staring into the flames as if waiting for something. They were alive, well, but changed. Belle touched the glass. Her chest ached. She wanted to go to them, but she didn't move, because she knew now she wasn't finished here, not yet. The next day, the beast brought her to a part of the castle she had not yet seen. A chamber hidden behind the old music room, accessible only when the sunlight struck a certain stained glass window at just the right angle. Inside was a room of memories. Paintings lined the walls, not magical, not moving, but real, portraits of a royal court. A young prince, golden-haired, smiling, a woman with fierce eyes and a book in her lap, a council of advisors, posed in false confidence. In the center of the room was a small wooden box. This, the beast said, is all that remains of who I was. He opened it. Inside were letters, some unopened, some worn from handling, a ring with a sapphire set in gold, a child's carved wooden horse, a broken comb. Belle looked at the items and felt a strange wave of tenderness. You kept them all this time. They remind me, he said, that I was insect, always what I became, and that I might still become something else. Belle touched the letters gently. They're from your mother, she said, recognizing the careful, elegant script. He nodded. She died before the curse, but she knew I was straying. She wrote to warn me. I didn't sit, listen. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Belle said something she had not expected. I think she's be proud of who you are now. He did not answer. But when she looked up, his eyes were closed, and there was a tear on his cheek. That night she didn't wait for sleep to take her. She went to the rose garden under moonlight, her breath clouding the air, her hands bare despite the cold. The roses had grown again. She knelt beside the fountain and whispered to the statue, to the garden, to the man she had glimpsed in her dreams. I see you now. And somewhere deep in the castle, something old and magical exhaled. Not broken, but beginning to bend. Chapter 12, The Promise to Return. Snow fell gently outside the windows of the castle, drifting in soft spirals like lace. The world beyond the enchanted walls lay in deep winter, the forest cloaked in silence. Inside, however, the hearths burned warm, and roses still bloomed in defiance of the season. Belle stood at the edge of the garden, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her breath hanging in the air like a question. It had been weeks, perhaps months. She no longer measured time by the sun, but by the rhythm of the castle, mornings in the library, afternoons in the garden, evenings beside the beast. She no longer counted the days since she arrived. But now, she could no longer ignore the ache in her heart. She missed them, her family, her father's soft, thoughtful silences, Colette's unspoken apologies, even Eveline's fire. They had shaped her world, and though she had built something strange and beautiful within these walls, she could feel their absence like a second heartbeat. And when she mentioned it aloud, she did not expect the beast's response. They sat beside the fire in the drawing room, where the windows fogged with warmth, and the walls seemed to hold every word with care. "I miss them," she had said softly. The beast, seated across from her, his frame too large for the chair he occupied, lowered his gaze. "I know. I don't want to leave," she added quickly. "Not forever, but just to see them, to know they sit well, to ease their worry." He was quiet for a long time. Then he stood. "Come with me." He led her to a small tower she had never noticed before, its stone spiral staircase curving high above the rest of the castle. At the top was a room made of glass, a kind of observatory, its windows offering a panoramic view of the surrounding forest, which was now buried beneath snow and mist. In the center of the room stood a low pedestal. Upon it, under a dome of glass, floated a single enchanted rose, not vibrant, not dead, somewhere in between. The petals drooped slightly, and a few had already fallen. "It is tied to the curse," the beast said quietly. "As long as it lives, so do I." Belle stepped closer, and when the last petal falls, he did not answer. She looked up at him. "How long do you have?" "Not long." The silence between them was heavy. "I will not keep you here," he said finally. "You may go to your family, but you must return." Belle blinked. "You sub let me leave." "You are not a prisoner," he said. "You never were." Tears stung her eyes. "I still come back, I promise." He nodded once, solemn. "1 week, no longer. If you stay away, I will not survive." The words lodged in her chest like thorns. "I wouldn't let you die," she whispered. And for the first time he smiled, a slow, sad, beautiful thing. "I know." That night, she packed a small satchel, not much, a warm scarf, a book, a sprig of dried lavender from the garden. The castle prepared everything else: a cloak lined with fur, boots that fit her perfectly, a horse with eyes like starlight that waited patiently by the gate. The beast stood with her at the edge of the snow-covered path. No guards, no goodbyes rehearsed. Just two people who had become something more than strangers, but not yet what they were meant to be. "I will come back," she said again. "Take the mirror," he said. "If you wish to see me, it will show you." She took it with both hands. Their fingers brushed. Something passed between them, unspoken. Belle stepped forward and surprised them both by pressing a kiss to his furred cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. The beast said nothing, but he watched her go until the forest swallowed her completely. And then he returned to the rose. And waited. Chapter 13. Return to her family. The forest felt different on the journey back, not dark or menacing, but muted, as if it too was holding its breath. Belle rode in silence, wrapped in the beast's fur-lined cloak, her fingers gripping the reins as the horse threaded its way through snow-heavy trees. The wind was sharp, but her heart was warmer than it had been in months. She was going home. Not to escape, not to run, but to remind herself of where she came from, and to share, if only in pieces, the person she had begun to become. The horse, enchanted though it must be, carried her swiftly. By nightfall of the second day, she recognized the familiar slope of the valley, the bend of the path lined with fir trees. The cottage came into view like a memory, crooked chimney, smoke rising in lazy curls, light glowing behind its frost-covered windows. It looked smaller than she remembered, or perhaps she had grown. She dismounted slowly, heart pounding. Then the door flew open. Belle. Colette ran to her first, arms outstretched, her shawl trailing behind her like a banner. Eveline was close behind, and their father, slower, leaning heavily on his cane, stood in the doorway, frozen as if he thought she might vanish. Belle barely had time to smile before she was wrapped in the familiar warmth of her sister's arms, her cheeks kissed, her hands squeezed. "You stir real," Colette whispered. "You stir really here." Evelyn Sepp's eyes shimmered. "We thought you might have died." Their father approached at last, his face pale with disbelief. He reached out, trembling. "My Belle," he said. She embraced him, tears sliding freely down her cheeks. "A sit 'em here, Papa. A sit 'em home." That night, they sat around the fire, the hearth crackling with a warmth that had once been scarce. The cottage was different now, tidier, brighter. The floor had been mended, the roof patched, the pantry full. They were not rich, but they were well. "After you left," her father said, "I sold the last of the cargo from the Isabel. It was enough to start again, enough to survive." He looked at her carefully. Sepp changed. Belle smiled faintly. "So have you." She told them only what they needed to know, that she had lived in a castle hidden by magic, that the beast had not harmed her, that she had been treated with kindness. She did not tell them of the dreams, of the library that spoke her name, of the man behind the mask, of the question asked every night. "Why did he let you come back?" Colette asked, frowning. "He trusts me," Belle said. Eveline raised an eyebrow. "And do you trust him?" Belle hesitated. "Yes," she said. And it was the truth. The days passed quickly, filled with the kind of busyness Belle had nearly forgotten. She helped prepare meals, swept the hearth, read aloud in the evenings. She sewed with Colette, walked to market with Eveline, tended her father's hands when they ached. She told herself she was happy. And she was, in part, but she could feel the castle calling to her, softly, like a melody she couldn't forget. And when she slept, she dreamed not of the past, but of a rose in a tower, drooping petal by petal, one breath at a time. She tried to ignore the ache in her chest, but it grew. On the 6th day, she looked into the enchanted mirror the beast had given her. She had resisted until then, afraid of what she might see. She whispered, "Show me the castle." The glass shimmered. She saw the dining hall, quiet and dark, the garden, untouched, the rose in the tower, 2 petals fallen, a third trembling. And then she saw him, the beast. He sat in the west garden, alone, hunched forward, as if the cold had finally crept into his bones. His head was bowed, one clawed hand rested in the snow beside a rose that had not bloomed. His body barely moved. Belle pressed her palm against the glass. And in that moment she knew. She didn't yet belong here anymore. She belonged with him. She rose from her chair, cloak already in hand, her satchel packed in moments. Her father stood in the doorway, as if he had known. "You sit going back," he said. "I have to," she whispered. "He sits dying. I stayed too long." He nodded, eyes glistening, but did not try to stop her. "Go." Her sisters came to the door as well. They did not speak. They only held her tightly, one last time, and watched her ride away into the snow. As the forest closed around her again, Belle leaned forward, urging the horse faster. Faster, faster, toward a castle hidden in the heart of winter, toward the man who had once been a beast, toward the promise she had made. Chapter 14. Dreams Turned to Nightmares. Belle rode hard through the snow-drenched woods, the wind biting at her face, her heart hammering louder than the hooves beneath her. Trees blurred past in streaks of white and shadow. The world narrowed to a single goal: get back. She hadn't realized until the mirror showed him how deeply the silence of the castle had crept over her absence, like frost closing in on a flame. The beast hadn't spoken to her in the vision, hadn't even looked up. And somehow, that frightened her more than rage ever could. He was giving up, because she hadn't returned, because she had broken her promise. The forest grew darker the deeper she rode. No sunlight pierced the tangled canopy. The cold gnawed into her bones. Even the enchanted horse began to falter, and still she pressed on. And that night, when she finally stopped to rest, her dreams came again. But this time, they weren't set like before. She stood not in the rose garden, but in the castle itself, empty, crumbling, drowned in shadow. Vines snaked through the halls, windows shattered, the chandeliers dripping with rot. The sky above had no stars. And in the great hall, on the shattered marble floor, the beast lay motionless. Petals from the enchanted rose were scattered around him like spilled blood. Belle ran to him, her hands reaching. But when she touched his face, it turned to stone beneath her fingers. She gasped and pulled back, but the stone spread, creeping up her arms like frostbite. Her skin grayed, her chest tightened. And then she heard his voice, faint, as if underwater. You said come back." Belle jolted awake, sweat slick on her skin, her breath catching in her throat. The fire she'd lit had long since died, only ashes remained. She wasted no time. By dawn, she saw the break in the trees, the familiar gates, tall and wrought with roses, now half covered in snow. She leapt from the saddle before the horse had even stopped and pushed open the gates with both hands. The castle loomed ahead, quiet, almost too quiet. There was no music, no lights flickering to greet her, no warm air brushing her face like a whisper. The magic was thinning. She ran up the steps, threw open the great doors. Inside, the walls were dim, dust had settled, the warmth was gone. The castle was still alive, but just barely. She called out, her voice echoing off stone. "Beast!" Nothing. She ran through the halls, the dining room, the library, the solarium, all empty. She climbed the stairs to the tower. The rose still floated under glass, but now only one petal remained, trembling. "Where are you?" she whispered. Her breath fogged the glass. The rose did not respond. Then she remembered the garden. The west garden was half buried in snow. The roses were wilting, their colors dull, their stems bowed under the weight of winter and grief. The fountain no longer sang. The statue at its center looked down in silence. And at the base of it all, slumped against the stone pedestal, was the beast. Belle rushed to him. He didn't stir. His body was curled inward, one hand resting limply over his chest, the other stretched toward a fallen rose, as though he had been reaching for it in his last moments. "Beast," she said, kneeling beside him. No, please." She touched his shoulder. He was warm, but fading. His eyes opened slowly, just a sliver. "Belle." Her name was barely audible, a breath, not a word. "You came back," he said. She nodded, her throat tight. "I sipped him here. I sipped him, so sorry I was late." He gave a faint smile, barely a curve of his lips. I dreamed you came. Then I dreamed you didn't sit. I couldn't tell which was true." She cupped his face, leaning closer. "This is true. I sipped him here now. I sipped him, not leaving again." A pause. "A sit. I'm glad," he whispered. "I can go now, knowing I saw you one last time." "No," she said fiercely. "You stirred, not going anywhere." His eyes began to close. "I stum not what you need," he murmured. "I stum not what you deserve. I stum just—" She didn't let him finish. "Don't say that," she said. "You are more than what you were, more than what the curse made you. You set kind. You set patient. You listen. You changed." His breath was shallow. She took both his hands in hers. And then, through tears and snow and breathless silence, Belle whispered, "I love you." The moment the words left her, the last petal fell, and everything stopped. Chapter 15. The Race Against Time. Time did not shatter like glass. It folded. The moment Belle whispered those 3 words, "I love you," the world paused, not with a jolt or a thunderclap, but with a breath the castle itself seemed to draw in, after holding it for too long. Snow halted mid-air, suspended like pearls on invisible strings. The roses froze, not with frost, but with stillness. Each petal paused in perfect silence. The wind stopped. The garden waited. And then the last petal, already fallen, vanished before it touched the ground. Belle held the beast in her arms, the snow melting against his fur, her tears trailing down his cheek. "Come back," she whispered. "Please, come back." His body was heavy, still. The warmth beneath his skin was fading, but not yet gone. She placed her forehead against his. "You don't get to leave me now. Not after everything. Not after you showed me who you are." No answer. Only stillness. "Please," she choked. "Don't let it end like this." And then the ground trembled. Not violently, not with anger, but with release. The sky cracked open in sudden light. A golden flare surged through the garden, soft and soundless, like sunlight breaking through deep water. The snow evaporated. The frost melted. The roses rose. One by one, their wilted heads straightened. Color returned. The petals glowed faintly. The fountain came alive, its water rising, sparkling like stardust. The vines climbed the walls anew, and the castle breathed. The beast stirred. At first just a twitch, one clawed finger curling in her hand. Then a breath, shallow, strained, but real. Belle gasped. Beast. His body tensed, arched, and then shuddered with something deeper than pain. Light gathered around him, not bright like fire, brighter. It spilled from his skin, from his wounds, from the place where his hand met hers. His form began to change. His massive limbs pulled inward, his fur faded like smoke in wind, his face narrowed, reshaped, horns cracked and fell, disintegrating into nothing. And then in her arms, not a monster, but a man, he lay unconscious, his head against her shoulder, breath steady now. His hair was dark and curling, his skin was warm beneath her fingers, and when she touched his cheek, no fur, no claws, just him. She couldn't breathe. And then his eyes opened. Dark, familiar, not beastly, just his. "Is it you?" she whispered. He looked up at her. "Yes," he said. His voice, though transformed, still held the weight of the one she'd known. Low, gentle, a little broken, a little new. And then he smiled. Belle couldn't stop the laugh that burst from her, half sob, half disbelief. She threw her arms around him, laughing and crying into his neck, holding him like she'd never let go again. "You came back," she whispered. "You brought me back," he said. She pulled back just enough to look at him, truly look at him. "You were him," she said. "In the dreams, the man I saw, it was always you." He nodded. "Part of me survived. It tried to reach you before the curse pulled it too far under." Belle touched his face, memorizing him all over again. "I saw you." He smiled. "And I saw you." Around them, the castle continued to transform. Vines retracted, stones smoothed. The gloom that had haunted the halls lifted like a veil being drawn back. And above, in the highest tower, the empty rose pedestal cracked and fell away, its purpose fulfilled. Later, when they walked together through the halls, her hand in his steps steadier by the moment, they passed mirrors that now reflected more than just faces. They showed memories restored, rooms reborn, a future rewriting itself in real time. Servants long turned to shadow began to return, half waking from a long slumber, blinking as though waking from a dream, human again. The music room rang with a distant, joyful note, as if the instruments had been holding it in for years. The castle was alive. The curse was broken, and the beast was gone. Only the man remained. But he was no longer just a prince. He was known, and he was loved. Chapter 16, The Confession. The castle breathed anew. Light poured through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floors with colors brighter than any Belle had ever seen. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses and fresh rain. Servants, once shadows, now smiled and moved with lively purpose, their eyes clear and warm. And in the heart of it all, Belle and the man who had been the beast walked side by side, their fingers intertwined as if to seal a promise neither had dared speak aloud until now. They found themselves in the great hall, the same room where weeks ago Belle had first met the beast, terrifying, lonely, bound by a curse. Now it was filled with warmth and music. A harpist played softly in the corner, weaving melodies that seemed to echo the new hope that filled the castle. The man paused, turning to Belle. His eyes, once fierce and guarded, were now open, honest and searching. "Belle," he said, his voice steady but trembling beneath the surface, "there is something I must tell you, something I've carried with me through years of silence and shadow." She looked up at him, her heart catching in her throat. "You saw me as a monster," he began, a faint smile touching his lips, "and yet you looked beyond the mask. You saw me, not the curse, not the fear, but the man beneath." Belle squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. He took a breath, gathering strength. "For so long I believed I was lost, that the darkness inside me was all I would ever be. But your kindness, your courage, they showed me something I had forgotten, that even in the deepest night, light can find a way." His gaze deepened, shimmering with vulnerability. "I love you, Belle. Not because you saved me, but because you chose to see me, whole and broken, beast and man. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of joy and relief. I love you too, she whispered. Not for who you were, but for who you are now, and for the journey we sip taken together. He reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. In you I have found my home, he said softly. And then beneath the vaulted ceiling, surrounded by light and the promise of new beginnings, they embraced. Outside, the castle blossomed in tandem with their love. Windows gleamed, gardens flourished, and the distant sound of laughter and music carried through the halls like a benediction. Belle and the prince, the man who was once the beast, had rewritten their story, proving that love born from understanding is the most powerful magic of all. Chapter 17. The Curse Breaks. The castle was alive with light. Sunlight poured through the soaring windows, bathing the halls in warmth and color. The stone walls, once cold and shadowed, now glowed with a soft golden hue. Vines that had crept and withered over centuries now bloomed vibrant with roses, their petals fluttering in a gentle, unseen breeze. Servants, no longer mere shadows, walked the corridors, their faces radiant, their laughter ringing like bells. In the heart of this renewed world stood the prince, once the beast, and Belle, whose courage and kindness had woven the threads of this miracle. The morning dawned clear and bright. The enchanted rose, once the emblem of the curse, lay shattered beneath the glass dome in the highest tower, a symbol of a spell undone. The prince and Belle ascended the spiral staircase together, hands intertwined, hearts beating with hope and a newfound freedom. At the summit they paused. The shattered rose petals crunched softly beneath their feet as they looked out across the realm. The curse was broken. The magic that had bound him in beastly form, that had darkened the castle and ensnared so many souls, was lifted forever. He turned to Belle, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Because of you, the darkness has passed, he said. Because of you, this place breathes again. She smiled, her own eyes sparkling. Because of us, she replied. Their lips met in a kiss, soft, deep, and full of promises. Word spread quickly throughout the kingdom. The once feared beast was gone, replaced by a wise and compassionate prince who ruled with kindness and justice. The villagers who had once whispered in fear now spoke with hope. The castle doors, long sealed by sorrow, stood open wide, welcoming all. In the weeks that followed, Belle and the prince walked the gardens, planned the future, and healed old wounds. Together, they restored not only the castle, but the hearts of those around them. The curse had not only been broken, it had been transformed into a story of redemption, love, and the power of seeing with the heart. As twilight fell on their first night, free from the spell's shadow, Belle and the prince stood on the balcony, watching the stars emerge. Hand in hand they whispered a vow, to new beginnings, to love, to forever. And in the quiet night, the castle sang, a song of hope, of life, of a beauty that could never fade. Chapter 18. A New Beginning. The castle had been transformed, not just in stone and flower, but in spirit. Where once there had been shadows, now light danced freely. Where silence had reigned, laughter echoed through the halls. Where sorrow had lingered, hope blossomed like the roses in the garden, radiant and eternal. Belle stood at the highest balcony, the cool evening breeze weaving through her hair. Below her, the courtyard bustled with life. Children running between blossoming beds, servants sharing smiles, and townsfolk marveling at the beauty restored. Beside her, the prince's hand found hers, warm and steady. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and violet. It feels different now, Belle said softly. He nodded, because it is. This castle, our home, is no longer a prison, it is a sanctuary. She smiled, squeezing his hand, and we are no longer prisoners either. He turned to her, eyes reflecting the colors of twilight. We are free. The days that followed were filled with new rhythms, less governed by magic's hold, more by choice and love. Belle took to exploring the village beyond the castle walls, greeted now not with fear but with respect and friendship. She visited the markets, shared stories with children, and helped mend old divides between the court and the common folk. The prince ruled with wisdom learned through hardship, a ruler who understood the value of kindness and the strength found in vulnerability. Together, they rebuilt bridges where walls once stood. One morning, in the rose garden, where the first seeds of their story had been planted, Belle knelt among the blooms. She touched a single red rose, now vibrant and alive. From behind, the prince joined her, his presence a quiet comfort. "We will plant many more," he said, "each one a promise of what has been and what will be." She looked up at him, her heart full. "And I promise," she said, "to stand beside you through every season." The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the land, a symbol of the new era unfolding. Belle and the prince walked hand in hand through the garden, their footsteps weaving together the past and future. The castle stood proud behind them, no longer a place of enchantment and curse, but a home built on trust, understanding and love. As night fell, stars twinkled above, witness to a love story that had defied darkness and found the dawn. And in that quiet peace, Belle knew this was only the beginning. The end. Thanks for spending this quiet time with me here at Sweet Dreams Storytelling. I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, and ready for a restful sleep. As we say goodnight, let the calm background music guide you gently into dreamland. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and until next time, rest well.
Old tape spins soft like a lullaby. Flicker of streetlights kissing the sky. Memories hum in a smoky hue. Yesterday lingers but feels brand new. Echoes of yesterday playing on repeat. Time stands still with every gentle beat. Close your eyes, let the calm settle in. The past whispers where the day begins. Coffee steam swirls like